And there's one other thing that I do recommend sometimes, especially for the purposes of bodybuilding, is do a lower volume block. Primarily use machines, Smith machines, and ideally have a training partner, and train to failure.
Folks, I am Dr. Mike Israetel from Renaissance Periodization, and I have the esteemed honor and privilege of having Dr. Eric Helms here from technically the University of New Zealand at Auckland.
The Auckland University of Technology.
In New Zealand.
It is in New Zealand.
God, did I fuck that up? And Eric has a PhD in sport and exercise science. So making people more jacked and more athletic and more strong and more fit and in a sense happier is the thing he cares about, maybe one of the most things in this world. Now, there is a problem. Eric is what I would consider, if not the preeminent researcher on reps in reserve, the preeminent early and current best theoretician on reps in reserve. Because to be a good theoretician, you have to know everyone else's research front to back, have tried to apply it to your life, applied it to your clients, applied it to other people, and really have a holistic understanding of RIR, which I consider you my absolute number one authority on RIR. Yeah. Now, mind you, this all sounded like a compliment. It was really a great insult. Because on the internet, Eric, this is the point of this video here, which is why we have you. People are telling me that RIR is stupid. And then another word that starts with a G, which we don't say anymore because it's very mean. And they say this and you ask them why. And what you get from that is they say, look, I know how to read studies. Yes, when there's 80 people yelling at you, you will go to 2 RIR and it's really 2 RIR, fine. But out in the real world, real people are 18 or 19 RIR away from whatever the hell, charitably, 3, 4, 5, 6 RIR, more than you think. That is, they're further away from failure than you think. So if we tell regular people, listen, go start your mesocycles at 3 reps in reserve, they're really at 6 reps in reserve, which everyone agrees is too far away to remotely do efficient hypertrophy for any one of the beginners. And so we're stuck with this conundrum of like, shouldn't we be telling people just to go to failure? Because that will really actually be 3 RIR because people don't actually train hard. Eric, is it true that people in the real world have a very big problem with estimating RIR and are significantly and largely way behind in their estimate? Tell us the story.
Great question. And according to the Mike Mentzer crowd, I actually have a PhD in being a wuss because my PhD was specifically on auto-regulating.
What a waste of time.
I know. Auto-regulating powerlifting training using an RIR-based perceived exertion model. So after studying for years to become a wuss, I have learned some things. And the one thing that is actually challenging to answer about that question is what is going on in the real world. Because when you do experimentally test people's RIR accuracy, I can't say with confidence that that's the same as the type of RIR accuracy that people have in the real world in all cases. And I'll tell you why. The way we measure RIR accuracy is by actually having people go to a target RIR, typically, on bench press, and then they'll stop at lockout, and they'll call out when they think they're at a target RIR that we set for them.
So like 2 RIR.
Correct. Call out when you think you're at a 2. Great.
2.
And then we go, keep going. Go. And then the spotter takes a smoke break and you die.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you for participating.
No problem. So essentially what we do is we calculate the difference between predicted RIR when you said 2 versus how many reps did you get when you're being motivated.
Because you keep them going, you push them further, you see the difference, and you're like, okay, you actually got 10 reps, you stopped at we thought was 2 RIRs, 8. So it turns out you were 100% correct.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then we measure also what's called RIR directionality, because there's multiple ways to fail, right? So you could say, I got 2 more and you get 1. You could say, I get 2 more and you can get 3. Both of those are an RIR difference for an absolute value of 1. Mm-hmm. But if we assess the directionality, is it a negative or positive number on average in the groups, then we can see if they're trending towards, with that accuracy, towards undershooting and thinking that they're closer to failure than they are, overshooting and pulling kind of the bro on Instagram thing of, that was definitely a 9.5. Mm-hmm. And like you actually are on the ground while you're saying that, right? Mm-hmm. So over times, depending on who I've talked to on the internet and the comments, people will level the critique that people are always saying they have more when they don't, kind of like these, egoed out ego lifters.
10 more, baby.
Exactly. Or if you're have a cult based around being an egoed out lifter, aka HIT, sorry, then
Oh, don't apologize to those people. I'm kidding, people.
Dogma's bad. Then the critique is, no, they're not actually going to failure. You don't know what true failure is. And I think that is one that is, I can understand the position, and I can understand why they might be skeptical of the research. But there's not many other ways to really ensure the RIR accuracy. Now, you can level the critique at that model where you do it to a predicted RIR, then you go to failure, look at the difference, and you see where it is, that maybe that's not actually valid because there's expectation. If I say 2, I'm probably going to do 2. And I would say there could possibly be an effect of that. But it's not the only tool we have to estimate that. But I will say the data using that method of comparing predicted versus actual RIR.
Bring in people who train out in the world who say whatever the fuck.
Yep.
You hit them up with a work set that they're warmed up to.
Yep.
You say, tell us, let's say 2 RIR when that happens. As soon as it happens, you're fucking like, go, 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 go. And they see how many more reps they get.
Exactly.
Okay.
I've been in 3 different labs, including my own. Dr. Zerdos is out in FAU, and also Darren Kandau's lab in Canada, University of Regina. And then there's also other research that's been done.
University of what?
Regina.
It's a V or an R?
Regina. Yeah.
A V. Got it.
Yes. There's also work that's been done out of Daniel Hackett's lab in University of Sydney. So all these various independent labs have done this type of research.
They're all bought and sold by Big Failure.
Big RIR.
Sorry, Big RIR, which is bigger than Big
no failure. Yeah.
Oh my God.
That's right.
Mega conglomerate.
Almost as big as Big Volume. So with these 4 labs that I'm aware of, and there's a few others, they've all measured this, and they all come to very similar findings.
That's how you know things probably true.
Yes.
And so what the findings?
The findings are that while there are some small effects on things that modify it, generally people are pretty accurate. So you're typically reporting somewhere between an accuracy of less than 1 RIR error, so 0.34 or something like that, to as much as maybe 2 reps off in certain conditions. Now those conditions are higher reps. That's when discomfort can actually get in the way of your actual perception of true failure. And also doing
higher, like 20 plus?
Over 12.
Over 12, yeah. Fuck,
it starts to have it, yeah.
To have that.
Over 12. And then potentially some other impacts that haven't been consistently shown. But through all the research done across these 5 labs and a few others, Halperin was actually able to meta-analyze the actual versus predicted RIR back in 2021, I believe. And their average error was 1. So there was a decent amount of variation around it. But you could say that the average person, regardless of whether they're trained or untrained, are going to be within 1 rep of what their prediction is, typically under-predicting. So that's one accurate thing if we give some credit to the Menser crowd. People aren't overshooting more often than they're undershooting.
Right, and that's really important, because if we saw it one way or the other, it'd be like, told you people weren't trying. Here's the thing, like, you get people in a social setting where there's an expectation.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, like, they're going pretty hard. But you could say, look, like if they were undershooting, it wouldn't look like this. If they were overshooting. So if it's about even, it's kind of like, look, maybe people are going a little bit easier outside the lab. But if they were mostly going easier outside the lab, what explains the fact that, you know, many of them undershoot versus overshoot in the lab? Are they trying to like posture like, oh, I really can do 110 kilos? It gets to be a lot of supposition. At the end of the day, it seems like we don't have to suspect that people are nonsensically far off in RIR.
Correct.
We can suspect maybe the studies are a little bit biased, little this and that. So with its 3 RIR off, it's not 6, it's not 10.
Yes.
Eric, we have a system at RP which we think maybe does some kind of job at guess and checking yourself to make sure you're not delusional about RIR. Because like, look, people can be off, and being off's not great. If I describe you that system briefly, can you red team it for me, or say like, that's actually quite good, but maybe there's got these problems with it? Would that be okay?
I will, but first let me just say, to give a little bit of credit to that type of research, there have been some efforts to confirm, are we seeing this by some objective data? And for those who aren't aware, velocity-based training, which is where we actually have what's called a linear position transducer or linear encoder, or sometimes less valid, an actual accelerometer, but ideally a linear encoder. It's actually a tethered system that measures displacement and tells you the average concentric velocity of the rep. And we know that as you get closer to failure, the bar slows down.
If you have maximum intent to move.
Correct, which you are coached to do.
Yes, okay.
And regardless, if you hit true failure, it's going to slow down to the point.
You can slow down at some point.
Yes. So one of the things you can do is establish a RIR velocity relationship for an individual. Have them with...
For an individual.
Correct. For an individual, for a lift.
Because it's different for a lift and individual.
Absolutely, it does. So you have this individual motivated to go to failure with maximal intent to accelerate every rep on bench press at a given load, and you take the last 5 reps, and you look at the mean velocity on those 5 reps, and with some understandable technical error, you prescribe a velocity zone that is associated with that RIR. And you can either use that to actually monitor training, or you can use it to experimentally confirm, oh, we had them do an RIR rating, which band were they in? And you can say, okay, they were on average this type of error. And I've been a part of studies on well-trained individuals where basically we look at it and we go, yeah, that's pretty accurate. Or, I mean, and they could be faking the slowdown, but at a certain point you have to go, you know what? We've got the actual reps, observing them, actual versus predicted, and we slapped a linear encoder on the bar, and we did see the velocity slow down to what we saw in a 2-failure test with no RIR prediction, just go to failure, and they match up. And
tough to fake all that.
Yeah, when you've got that, and that's coming out after a meta-analysis, and they align, you've got pretty good consensus that, yeah, okay, at worst, people on average are 1 further rep from failure than they think they are in these studies.
Or 1 rep too close to failure.
Sorry, I think earlier I might have misspoke, but when they're basically undershooting.
Undershooting by 1 on average.
Correct.
So then one out of every 5 or 6 people is overshooting by average, because these are standard, probably relatively normal distributions.
They're actually not. They do skew towards saying, oh, I think I have fewer reps left than I actually do.
Fewer reps left.
So people do sandbag it on average, but again, by a rep.
Not
1.
500.
On average.
Yes.
Not 10.
Yes. Okay. And so the RP thing.
Yes.
What we say is, look, choose your first microcycles load and rep targets to get around 3 RIR-ish.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple conditions. If it's a longer meso, a little more. If it's shorter, a little less. And the RP hypertrophy app does this. Just says 3 RIR week 1. You don't know if that's really 3 RIR. It looks like you don't. Fine. What we say is, every single workout that you come in, on average, you increase by a rep, or you increase by, let's say, 2.5 kilos, 5 pounds-ish. You just keep increasing, and you try to hit the same reps you did. You must, at some point, either quit or really hit failure, unless you plan on getting stronger and more strength endurance for the rest of time. That point at which you hit reliable failure, trying your best to hit 10 reps with 315 pounds, even though at 300 you only hit 10, and now it's basically, that's it, you're done. You hit 9 reps, you can be pretty goddamn sure you're going to failure. And then you look back at what you thought was 3 RIR and you go, was it really? Because you pick a 3 RIR load and it takes you 12 weeks and 60 pounds of bar increase to get to failure. You sure as shit we're not at fucking 3 RIR. But if it takes you 4 weeks and 15 pounds of bar increase, you were probably pretty goddamn close. And so as you do more mesocycles and get more experience, you get better at picking that first number. Someone's like, really? Like only 500 on the leg press? Like, trust me, bro. 530 on that last week for 12. If I can do that, that'd be amazing. This is close for me. What do you think about that method? What are its detractions? What are its upsides?
I like it. And I think it makes sense when it's delivered in that context. There are potentially better ways to do it in a coaching environment. But if you're self-training and using an app,
this is all for self-training.
That's
nobody watching you.
Yeah, there's only one other thing I would add to it to improve it. But before I get to that, I'll just say why I like the method. For one, progression is the great arbiter, right? So if you are eventually adding reps, adding load on the bar, or trying to get closer and closer to failure, if the RIR is so off and you're undershooting it so much that the stimulus is so low that you can't do it, then that will become apparent.
Yep.
Right? Likewise, if you are undershooting it, but you're still making great progress.
Who gives a shit?
Exactly. Oh no, I was at a 4 RIR, but I'm making great gains. The only downside to that is that if you hang out with one of the people from the camp that I disparaged earlier, they will not like you.
Yes, but they'll not like you even more because you have good gains and you're proving a point against their...
Correct. You're not only damaging their ideology, but you are also not displaying the quality that only matters in life. Not being a good person.
Only men can do.
Yes, but how
Real
hard close to failure can
Yes.
you go? Yes. So that's why I like it. I think it's a great way. The progressive overload is a great arbiter. The other thing I like about it is that there is a point where high RIR predictions, meaning assessing when you're further from failure, becomes less accurate.
6. What the fuck is that even?
Yeah, and it's right around 5.
Interesting.
Yeah, so, like I said earlier, that is modified by how many reps you're doing. Like if you're trying to assess when you're at 5 RIR in a set of 8 or a set of 6, that's probably a little easier than doing that in a set of 30.
Yeah.
So high reps and also being farther from failure are more difficult and challenging to assess. The former because there's more generalized cardiometabolic, cardiorespiratory fatigue, pain that you could push through, but it just feels hard. And discomfort and repetitions in reserve are linked to some degree. And then the latter point is just that, yeah, when you're further away from the light at the end of the tunnel, it's harder to gauge the distance.
Yes.
Right? So those are the reasons why I like it. 3 RIRs within the band where we have pretty good accuracy.
Sure.
And then secondly, like I said, progressive overload is the arbiter. Another tool that I like to use when I teach people how to get better at RIR accuracy is something that is well accepted in gyms these days, especially here in Vegas. Film yourself.
Oh yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Naked or are we clothed?
You know, that is optional and also dependent upon the gym's policies.
Ah.
So I will say that most bodybuilding gyms, you are mostly naked anyway.
Yeah.
That's just called bodybuilding.
What's another cloth? What's another 3 inches of,
exactly.
1.5 inches of cloth?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, why backs are just an excuse to show your nipples, right? So anyway, when you film yourself, you get a little more feedback. That's just another form of feedback. When you're just training and you're not filming it, it is how hard did I feel? You're going off memory, and depending upon where your attentional focus is, it can be limited.
Yes.
And like one beautiful thing about what I talked about earlier is how linear encoders give you an objective measure of bar velocity. You can also see, stepping outside of your feelings, how fast did it look like I moved?
Yes.
And I can't tell you how often powerlifters, they'll look at the video and go, oh, that was easier than it felt.
Yeah.
And that's because velocity is something that is a little more divorced from your feelings. And typically when you're doing a set where you care about the velocity, it's hard, right? You're lifting heavy in a powerlifting context. So it feels hard. And even putting 85% of your one arm on your back, especially when you're fatigued, deep into a mesocycle, especially if you have a high squat relative to your body weight or just a high absolute number period, it always feels terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So
even the warm-ups feel terrible.
Absolutely. Sometimes worse because you've had a really hard training block.
Sure.
So having this ability to not necessarily measure velocity, but give you feedback to where your eye is looking at the speed of the bar gives you one more tool to accurately assess it.
Yeah, that's a great tool. Most people, when tested and pushed, are going to be pretty damn close. There's not this mass delusion of people training real far from failure, but there are some of us, maybe even many, maybe even a third, that probably train pretty far from failure compared to what we think.
Yes.
And we can add load and or reps to the bar with an expectation of matching the load or reps from last time to push ourselves further to learn about our bodies, potentially also using video feedback if we're training by ourselves. And if we have a coaching staff and fellow lifters, the whole thing is made easier because everyone calls you on your shit.
Yes.
Decent summary?
I would say so. And there's one other thing that I do recommend sometimes, especially for the purposes of bodybuilding, is do a lower volume block. Primarily use machines, Smith machines, and ideally have a training partner and train to failure. Mm-hmm. You know, you can set up training variables in many ways, and for it to still be optimized, you individually
lower the volume, increase the proximity to failure.
So this is basically doing a block of something akin to HIIT, or at least similar to it. And this, I think, really does help you anchor a failure point.
Sure.
So one thing that you can read about in any of the perceived exertion-based studies is that ratings of perceived exertion become, which RIR is not exactly, but it's closely related to, they become more accurate when you have anchored what is the top of the scale and what's the bottom.
Yes.
So if you were using, say, a Borg RPE, which is just the original 1 to 10 or even
6 to 20,
6 to 20
Don't
scale.
Get that 1 to 10 shit out of my face. That's
Yep.
make-believe.
Sorry, no category ratio scale for Dr. Mike. But you anchor a 10 or a 20 as failure, and you actually have them do momentary muscular failure, and you go, okay, that's a 20. All of a sudden, now those two variables, RIR and the RPE rating, are more closely aligned.
Sure.
Statistically, and you will see more consistent actually achieving of that because they've anchored it.
So there are the average person out in the world trying to lift weights who is self-motivated is probably pretty fucking close to failure when they think, a little bit shy of it, not a ton. But there are lots of people who think they're at 3 RIR. Very few people talk about that person who's at 3 RIR and they're like for sure at 0. And they're like, yeah, man, could have had 3 more, right? There's those people, and there's plenty of them. And there's also tons of people that are really sandbagging and they're really far from failure. But that saying of, well, people are really far from failing and sandbagging, it's maybe spiritually, because we don't have numbers on this, like a third of the population, just to keep it even, for just a mental thought experiment's sake. It's like a third-ish, but we're saying it's like everyone. And we're removing 2 groups of people, one group vetted very well by research of people, most people actually get quite close, and the other group of people who say there's 3 RIR, but they're really 0, there's tons of them also.
Yeah, there was a study, and I brought this up in our discussion of failure, where they actually took recreationally trained men, I think 6 months of more experience, who use bench press, trained for strength or hypertrophy, if I recall correctly, and they said, hey, what load do you use when you do 10 reps? Come on into the gym, in the lab, have you go to failure, and we'll see how many reps you got. Now, the important thing about that study, and it is miscited as an assessment of RIR accuracy in the wild, or how hard people train, is that they did not ask people, what do you use for a set of 10 to failure? They asked them, what do you use for a set of 10? So there very well could have been people using the RPE app in that study who go, yeah, well, I start mesocycles off with my 13 RM because I'm training at a 3 RIR.
Yep.
And then you go, oh, look at that. People think they're doing a 10 rep max. It's actually a 13 rep max. It's like, no, that person purposely chose to use a 3 RIR load. So that's what that study doesn't tell you. And in that study, which is probably, if anything, overestimating people who are, sandbagging because of that fact that not everyone is training to failure purposefully and with knowledge, it indicates that, maybe about a third of people are too far from failure to be effective, like 5 RIR
to be
plus.
Maximally effective.
Correct. There's a good, probably 40, 50% of people who are like a little bit undershooting, but definitely in a good range.
Close.
And there's a minority of people who are very on point, and a very small amount who are actually regularly going, I got one more, and then they fail. And there's no problem with, well, there is a problem with that because it's more of an ego issue. It's not an accuracy issue because it self-corrects immediately.
Yes, it's false. You do not deadlift 405 for 10.
You missed. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Eric, thank you so much for coming on our Pathetic Backwater channel. 3DMJ is the company that you represent.
Yes, sir.
You guys offer coaching. You guys offer mentorship opportunities in some respect. You guys are coaching probably the best natural bodybuilders in the whole world, and
some of them
the kings of that space. And you yourself are a natural bodybuilder. You coach still yourself.
A very small number. I'm not actively taking them. My primary role, like you, is the science officer for 3DMJ. So I make sure that the coaches have the best knowledge to serve our clients as best as they can. And I contribute a lot to the Vault, where we have our courses.
The Vault. And how do I get to the Vault?
You go to 3dmjvault.com, and there you can see all of the courses we have, from bodybuilding program design, which is very relevant to what we've talked about today, from the default diet, how to set up your habitual approach to your bodybuilding diet, to everything from how do I count calories, how do I count macros, how do I improve adherence to my program, and everything in between.
Awesome. I love it. Amazing resource, guys. Check that out. Dr. Eric Helms. He has a YouTube. Follow him there. If you see him in real life, follow him to his home. See you guys next time.